Westminster is a pressure cooker, always. But today, the needle's off the scale. You can taste the tension in the air, thick as London fog. The reason? A document, 12 pages. Ordinary enough until you realize who wrote it and what it contains. Prince William, the future king, has just thrown a constitutional grenade into the heart of Keir Starmer's government, and the shrapnel is flying everywhere. Let's rewind. 2 days ago, a senior royal aide, face grim, walked into number 10 Downing Street. In his hands, the Memo. A carefully constructed, legally precise argument against the government's proposed reforms. The aide delivered the package and left. He knew what was coming. Inside number 10, panic. The document landed on Starmer's desk. A crisis meeting was immediately convened. 90 minutes of what one source described as electric debate. But the debate wasn't about the merits of William's arguments. It was about containment, how to bury this thing before it detonated. The initial reaction was censorship. Legal advisors were immediately tasked with exploring options to gag the media. National security was floated as a possible pretext. Think about that for a moment. The government's first instinct, faced with legitimate constitutional concerns from the heir to the throne, was to shut down free speech, to silence dissent. But even that wasn't enough. A directive went out from the Cabinet Office. The memo was classified as a sensitive internal document. Civil servants were warned, discuss its contents, and you'd be in breach of the Official Secrets Act. A threat, pure and simple, a wall of silence enforced through fear. Why the terror? Because this wasn't just a polite disagreement, it was an indictment, a forensic dismantling of the government's legislative agenda, and it was written with a level of constitutional understanding that caught everyone off guard. One number 10 insider reportedly confessed, "We catastrophically underestimated him. We thought he was a ceremonial figure. He's a constitutional heavyweight. They saw William as a ribbon cutter, a handshaker. They were wrong. He's a student of history, a guardian of tradition, and he's not afraid to fight for what he believes in." Then came the leak. At 4:30 p.m., a senior constitutional editor at the BBC received a copy of the memo. The carefully constructed dam had burst. The news spread like wildfire. The royal family was in chaos. The government was scrambling. Prince William, informed of the leak during a charity event, remained calm. An eyewitness overheard him telling an aide, "The constitutional principles at stake are more important than palace protocols. The British people have a right to know." That's the backdrop. Now let's get to the bombshells. The 5 charges that William levels against Starmer's government, these aren't just minor quibbles. They are fundamental challenges to the legality and legitimacy of the government's actions. They expose a power grab, a disregard for tradition, and a dangerous level of constitutional recklessness. And they all start with the unlawful usurpation of royal prerogative. This is the first hammer blow. William, backed by centuries of legal precedent, accuses the government of using simple legislation to bypass and erase powers that belong to the crown. Powers that are not just ceremonial, but the bedrock of Britain's constitutional checks and balances. Starmer, he argues, is acting beyond his legal authority. He's trying to take powers that don't belong to him. He is, in essence, attempting a constitutional coup. The future king has accused the prime minister of acting like a tyrant. Those are strong words, but they're not just empty rhetoric. They are backed by legal arguments, historical precedent, and a deep understanding of the British Constitution. And it's not just some backbencher sounding off. This is Professor Alistair Finch of Oxford University, a man who has advised prime ministers on constitutional law, calling William's argument constitutional dynamite. He's not mincing words. He's saying the government is building a house with no foundations, that this legislation, if it passes, will trigger a constitutional crisis because it violates the fundamental unwritten rules that govern the nation. He goes further. He calls it the most dangerous executive overreach since the 17th century. Think about that. The 17th century. We're talking about the English Civil War, the execution of a king. That's the level of historical parallel being drawn here. But the brilliance doesn't stop there. A King's Counsel briefed on the memo told The Times that William's argument on prerogative is unanswerable. He wrote, "The Prime Minister seems to believe he is the head of a republic. He is not. He is the King's First Minister. This memo is not a plea. It is a formal constitutional reminder of that fact." Ouch. Starmer's lawyers have been completely outmaneuvered. The government can't simply ignore this legal challenge. They have been publicly accused by the heir to the throne of breaking the unwritten constitution. And their initial response, calling William's intervention inappropriate, now looks utterly ridiculous. This isn't politics. This is legality. Now let's move to the second bombshell. This is where things get truly global. William charges the government with a reckless disregard for the Commonwealth. He argues that Starmer, in his ideological rush to diminish the monarchy, has forgotten that King Charles is not just the King of the United Kingdom. He is the head of state for 14 other sovereign nations: Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These are not just historical footnotes. They are independent nations, and they share a head of state with the UK. The proposed legislation, which would strip the king of ceremonial powers and publicly disclose his private communications, would apply to his role as king of the UK. But it would inevitably bleed into his role as head of the Commonwealth. Did Starmer consult with the prime ministers of these realms before proposing legislation that fundamentally alters the nature of the crown they all share? The answer, according to a senior Whitehall source, is a resounding no. They didn't even consider the global implications. They were so focused on their domestic political agenda that they insulted 14 other independent nations. This isn't just a constitutional crisis. It's a diplomatic catastrophe. William argues that this legislation treats the Commonwealth realms as irrelevant colonial afterthoughts, and the fallout is already beginning. Sources in Canberra and Ottawa are reporting deep concern and a feeling of being blindsided. A diplomatic cable from the Australian High Commission describes the Starmer government's move as constitutionally reckless and deeply disrespectful. Deeply disrespectful. That's the language of a major diplomatic rift. One senior Canadian diplomat reportedly said, "We share a head of state. You cannot just change the rules of the shared monarchy without so much as a phone call. This is not how allies behave." But here's the kicker. A leaked WhatsApp message from a radical faction of Labour MPs, the ones who secretly called the royals parasites, allegedly reads, "If the Commonwealth realms are upset, good. It's time they grew up and became republics." This is the true agenda. This isn't just about modernizing the monarchy. It's a deliberate attempt to dismantle the monarchy and the Commonwealth all in one go. Prince William's memo has exposed that plot to the entire world, and Keir Starmer has been caught in the middle, exposed as either complicit in this radical plan or, at best, a constitutionally naive leader who has been played by his own party. That brings us to the third constitutional bombshell, and perhaps the most constitutionally brilliant part of William's argument, the charge of corrupting the civil service. This isn't some emotional outburst. This is a future king defending the very integrity of the British state. We knew senior civil servants were deeply uncomfortable with the proposed legislation, believing it to be unconstitutional. William's memo takes that discomfort and amplifies it into a full-blown crisis. He argues that Starmer's government, by pushing this legally questionable legislation, is forcing civil servants to violate their own constitutional oath. The British civil service doesn't serve the Prime Minister of the day. They serve the Crown. Their entire code is built on political neutrality and upholding the Constitution. William's memo reportedly argues that the government is pressuring these permanent secretaries to provide legal justifications for a policy they know is unconstitutional, a direct violation of the Civil Service Code. One source called this section of the memo a masterstroke. William isn't just defending himself or the royal family. He is positioning himself as the defender of the hundreds of thousands of politically neutral civil servants who are being forced to choose between their careers and their constitutional duty. He is, in effect, giving them constitutional cover, reminding them that their loyalty is to the Crown, not to the Labour Party. Constitutional chess at the highest level. But it gets worse. Buried deep within the annex of the 12-page document, William exposes a secret clause in Starmer's draft legislation, a clause that reveals the government knew the civil service would object. The memo points to a section of the proposed bill that would give new, sweeping powers to the Prime Minister to reassign or discipline senior civil servants, including permanent secretaries, who are deemed to be obstructing the legislative agenda of His Majesty's government. A purge clause, a loaded gun aimed directly at the head of any civil servant who dares to follow their constitutional oath and question the government's radical agenda. The Starmer government didn't just pressure the civil service, they wrote a legal mechanism to punish them for their loyalty to the Crown. This is the executive overreach that constitutional experts have been warning about. A deliberate attempt to dismantle the checks and balances that have protected Britain from tyranny for centuries. William reportedly calls this clause an affront to democratic principles and a hallmark of an illiberal state. This isn't a debate about royal finances or ceremonial duties. This is a fight for the soul of the British Constitution. The government knew their plan was unconstitutional, and instead of changing the plan, they decided to legalize the punishment of anyone who pointed it out. This is the kind of detail that turns a political disagreement into a full-blown constitutional crisis. Now, for the fourth bombshell. This is where William directly challenges Starmer's democratic right to even propose this legislation. He makes the devastating charge of public mandate deceit. William's team has done their homework. The memo quotes Starmer's own party manifesto from the last general election, forensically analyzing every single line related to constitutional reform. The killer point? William's memo states that nowhere in its electoral manifesto did the governing party ask the British people for a mandate to conduct such a radical and destabilizing reorganization of the British Constitution, a devastating political attack. William is accusing Starmer of lying to the British public, of winning the election on a platform of stability and moderation, and then hijacking that victory to enact a radical ideological agenda that he never had the courage to put to a vote. Labour won with only 34% of the popular vote, and William is ramming that point home. He is essentially saying, you do not have the people's permission. This charge is designed to hit the Labour Party where it hurts most. Its backbench MPs, especially the 12 we know, are already expressing serious doubts. They are now being told by the future king that they are supporting a policy their own voters never agreed to, being forced to choose between loyalty to their party's radical faction and the people who actually elected them. A strategic move to break Starmer's parliamentary support from within. The immediate impact has been explosive. A new YouGov poll shows a catastrophic 15-point drop in Starmer's personal approval rating. And when asked if they believed the Prime Minister has a public mandate to make radical changes to the monarchy's constitutional role, an overwhelming 78% of British adults said no. The petition opposing the constitutional changes has surpassed 1.2 million signatures, making it one of the fastest-growing petitions in UK history.